There are places where time seems to stop. Here in the hills of eastern Tennessee, you can hear the wind tell stories of the past, of pain and struggles, and the building of a new frontier. In that spirit, the historic town of Jonesboro, Tennessee, has become the heart and soul of this growing movement called storytelling.
Take this milkweed seed, take it home, put it in the ground, blow it in the air. Next. Take another milkweed seed. Incoming. Boom.
The first thing she saw was the whirling finger of a tornado drop down out of the storm. And the first thing she saw it hit.
Every October for the past 20 years, storytellers from all over the world gather in Jonesboro to share tales from the past, tell stories of the present, and evoke wonderful memories with words as they weave their magic into the imagination of the listeners. This past autumn, 10,000 people came here to attend the 20th anniversary celebration of the National Storytelling Festival. Eight large tents and stages were erected for the storytellers to perform to standing room only audiences. The 3-day event allowed the visitors to move from tent to tent, listening to their favorites of the 91 storytellers who performed nearly 1,000 stories. They had come to Jonesboro to listen, learn, and be entertained by the masters of storytelling.
To have a good story, you have to have three things all working together. There's the teller, there's the listeners, and there's the story. And that triangle has to work. So if you've chosen a story that works well for you, that you have a connection with, and your listeners have a connection with, can have a connection with, then that's a good story for them.
He took down the sail. He wrapped the sail about him and he said, "Sail, keep me warm." But the wind said, "A sail can't keep you warm. I'll freeze you, Kagan." And he blew down from the north, bringing snow and sleet and ice. Stories exist as murals in caves, which are kind of the labyrinth of our life. And that what people do is they turn on the light. When they tell a story, they just turn on a light. And suddenly you can see the mural of the story whole. And he heard a long calling down the sea, her singing, "Kagan, Kagan, Kagan. Turn ye now to me, turn your back unto the wind, and all the weary windy sea, Kagan."
I think a good story comes from the heart. We can tell stories, we can memorize them, we can repeat them. But a story can't come from the head. It must come from the heart.
I was awake as daylight broke, despise and joy lumped in my throat when I caught that cat and stuck it in a sack. I left ajar the door. I needn't worry anymore. You see, I'd be the only one that's coming back. So I headed down the pasture. My old heart was beating faster. You know, it's strange how crazed with hate a man can get. My stride showed a persistence till I'd reached a good safe distance. Now the time had come to blow this cat to bits. So I tied the dynamite on that cat secure and tight. Then I struck a match, lit the fuse, and run. I hid behind a tree, got down upon one knee, and peeked around the trunk to watch the fun. I was stunned and paralyzed when I saw and realized the cat weren't there where it'd been before. He was speeding up the trail like it was packing precious mail straight for the house. Towards that open door. It belongs in this tradition, this oral tradition, because it is a part of our heritage, the Cowboys' heritage, and America's heritage. The stories that bring history a little more alive or bring us closer together as human beings when you realize that we all have so much in common, and that's the beauty of it.
Someone asks, what is that story about? And I can tell them exactly what I heard. Even at that moment, they're hearing a different story than the one that I'm telling and the one that I heard. And then inside that is a kind of explosion of visual images that is a secret story, secret to me, the teller, and the audience.
I dreamed I was in Africa, standing tall and free. I dreamed of a time to be alone with my own family.
The things we remember from history are the stories. Things we remember from our own life are stories. And they may have started out as facts, but we organize them in our memory into stories. So without stories, we wouldn't have anything of what we consider the human experience of the universe.
But now I am a slave, and I sing my sad, sad song. Sing my sad, sad song. When I die, I will be free, and with the birds I'll roam. I'll see my mother's face when at last I return home.
I love old stories, old plots that have been handed down over time. And I feel when I'm telling an old tale in my own words that I'm touching humanity as far back as the hearth fires of ancient days.
I was right, I was wrong all along. I was right, I was wrong all along. I was wrong all along, and I knew I was wrong. I was right, I was wrong all along. The back room was filled with cigar-smoking gents, and against my good judgment, it's back there I went. They offered me whiskey, which I never touch. And I frequently told them, no, don't pour me too much. It was not what I wanted and not what I planned. But the next thing I knew, there were cards in my hand, and like many's the time that I've almost resolved to never play cards when there's money involved.
I think I like the performing part of it. That comes from my mother. My mother can go to the supermarket and it becomes an epic. When she comes back, she's playing all the characters. A whole story happens. So I think it's probably always been in my blood to tell stories.
In a little village in Hungary, up in the mountains, there lived a shoemaker. He was a good shoemaker. But better than that, he was a wise man. He knew the answer for everything. No matter what you came and asked, he would know. His fame spread throughout the entire country. Rich men, noblemen would pull up to a shop in huge carriages. They would squeeze into the little shoemaking shop just to get a moment of his time.
I think it's important to tell stories about your life. When you start to tell the stories, then suddenly it's like you draw your own attention to your own life. So I think that's really important. And above and beyond that, the stories from your tradition, from all the traditions, there's some wonderful laughs, wonderful tears, and wonderful teaching and all of those things.
That must be the shoemaker. I knew he was a great man. Look how he's dressed. He said, please, please, come in. And he invited him in. He treated him with honor, with respect. After the wedding, he placed him in the place of honor next to the bride and groom. He proposed a toast to the new couple, health and happiness. Everyone rose and drank down that wine. That is everybody but the shoemaker. He just stood there holding his wine. Everybody looked at him. They leaned toward him. They expected him to say something wise, but he didn't say a word. He just pulled his pants away from his body and poured the wine down his pants. Well, some people laughed. Some whispered. Nobody knew what to do. But the whole meal was like that. He took off his hat and he very carefully spooned in peas. He took cabbage balls and put them into one pocket of his coat, and chicken paprikash and put it into the other. And then he squashed them. Finally, Samuel leaped up and he said, "What are you doing? What are you doing? I thought you were a wise man. I thought you'd come here and teach us something. You're acting like a fool." And the shoemaker said, "I've been teaching you ever since I sat down. You see, I was the man you threw out this morning. And you threw me out because you thought I was a beggar. And you thought that because of the clothes I wear. When I came back, dressed in the clothes of a rich man, you treated me with honor and respect. It seems you didn't want me here at all. You wanted my clothes. And so, I'm feeding them. And with that, he took a glass of tea and said, "Drink well, my coat." He poured it into his pocket, and he left. Fools look at men's clothes. Wise men see their souls.
So the giant ate his meal, and he started to snore, and Jack crept out of the kitchen door. But before Jack left, he made so bold as to take the giant's bag of gold. That bag of gold sure made his mother smile. They were happy for quite a while. But of course, you know, Jack went up that stalk and he hid when he heard the giant talk, saying, "Fee, fi, fo, fum, I smell the blood of an Englishman. Be he live or be he dead, I'll grind his bones to make my bread." But the giant's wife said, "Now there aren't any little boys about, so you eat what I cooked or you eat out."
I grew up listening to stories on my grandparents' porch, grandmothers, grandfathers, uncles, and my father definitely, telling stories, you know, about this and that. But I really didn't know how important stories were. I took it for granted, because everybody told stories. It was different back then. No one Nintendo or TV and stuff, so it was just something we did. So I got to love hearing the old folks talk. And I tend to like those kind of stories that are drawn from my roots down south.
Eve said, "Adam, honey, why don't you put up the stove while I hang the curtains?" Adam said, "How come you can't put up the stove and I hang the curtains? You just as strong as me. The Lord gave us the same amount of strength. How come you always trying to push the heavy stuff off on me?" "Oh, Adam, there's men's work and there's women's work. Just wouldn't look right to me be doing all that heavy stuff." Adam said, "Look right to who? We ain't got no neighbors yet."
And there then a door at the knocking came. And Prince-tha opened down to wint it. Was a woman young it who outstood the door side, but oh my, she how awful looked, the rain from and the weather heavy. The hair streamed down her water in her clothes, it into ran the top of her shoes, it outran at the heels. "Are you who?" asked Prince-tha. "Well, I am a cessprin," declared she. A cessprin, thought Prince-tha. Ha ha, about soon we'll find that. But he nothing said out loud, polite being. Only into guest bed went room-tha. Off took the bedding all, and springs on the pia put.
I began to discover rhythms, storytelling allows sound. With my own children, I would hear rhythms like raisins, raisins, all we are is raisins. It's so different in print. Oh, woe is me bones, oh, woe is me bones. Story about bees, and I would watch my son's eyes. And, you know, if he got bored, I'd change the scene. But if he liked it, woe is me bones, I'd keep the story. So because of them, I was discovering that this is different. It's not print, it's sound. And sound is musical. And suddenly, I realized this is a whole medium.
And then the fool, he leaned against his favorite tree, and he prepared to tell a story. He waited for his audience to gather. And before he started, he saw Todd, the poet's son, hiding behind a hedge. Todd had never came. And then his audience gathered. A fly flew down and twitched nervously on his head. A mosquito sat upon his cheek and was about to take a bite. And then the bees were followed by the fairies. And the fool began. Episode 67.
Penelope, the girl with 100 rainbows in her pockets. Penelope. And it's so human. You use the voice and you use the eyes and you use your personality and you sense you're really talking to another human because stories bring that out. So I love the humanness and I love the sound and I love the intimacy of storytelling.
Every time I tell a story, I'm telling not one story, but if it works well, everyone who hears that story is telling their own story along beside it. My real goal is to craft the story so that when a person hears it, they will say either, I've been there, or I've known that person, or something like that's happened to me. Finally, after traveling up and down the street all day, at 4 o'clock, exactly at 4 o'clock, we would arrive at the place we had started out for in the morning. Because at 4 o'clock, my little brother and I would follow our mother as she walked faster and faster and went straight in the door of the Lady Fair Beauty Salon. When I'm working with description, I want to be very careful, and that's one place where the audience is a real guide. I don't want to show them every leaf on every tree. Because it's boring and it sort of violates their integrity as intelligent listeners. Now this was a proper establishment, not wide open where you could see transformations that weren't any of your business to start with, but with little booths that they sort of disappeared into, looking one way and came out all changed. And what I try to do is work with smells and with sounds and with textures and with touch. I often want to try to say, what's the obvious way to create this place? Now enter it through a different sense. Mrs. Bryson had a huge magnet with a string tied to it, and if all the other women were gone, my brother and I would get to take that magnet and pull it through the hair on the floor and pick up all the dropped bobby pins. You give it a big swing, it would swing through that hair. Hair would fly everywhere. Bobby pins would jump all over that thing. It would come out looking like a hairy porcupine. She would blow the hair out of it, gather up the bobby pins, drop them in a sanitary jar, and then sweep the floor, and everything was finished.
We communicate together, we get together, and storytelling is one way that people have always gotten together. It's a very powerful way of connecting heart to heart. It happens across the table. It happens in whispers between parents and children. It happens on the platform in the grand scale of performance, but it happens. It takes place in time and space, and it makes us feel like we're not alone.
I can see the power of storytelling. I can see the sparkle in the listener's eyes. I can see lives changed by the power of story. I don't want it to stop. We're just beginning.